to Old News.
I'm Megan Daly.
I'm Felicia Frano.
And today we'll take you back in history to talk about tobacco.
Before we do, you know there are 1.1 billion tobacco users in the world, and those statistics are only expected to increase to 1.6 billion over the next 2 decades.
And now, here's Brandon in the field to explain the effects of production.
Good.
Brandon?
Yes, thank you, Megan. As you can see here behind me, I'm at the tobacco field. Tobacco has always been farmed and used for a bunch of reasons dating back to use by the American Indians for medical reasons. You could crush leaves or chew them. These leaves could be applied to eczema, snake bites, and toothaches. The production of this product dates back to 1612, when English settlers cultivated the first crop in Virginia, and increased the popularity only ranged from then. In 1614, 7,000 shops in London sold tobacco. By 1624, up to 200,000 pounds of tobacco were produced. Tobacco was produced here in the United States and nicknamed as the New World. Due to high popularity because of the addictive nature and nicotine, tobacco found its way into European markets, where it turned into for smoking for recreation rather than for medicine, as the Native American Indians typically use it for.
Thank you, Brandon.
How interesting is that, folks?
And now we go to Shay in the studio to explain the effects of exchange. Shay?
Thank you, Felice, and good morning. As you can see behind me is a map reflecting the effects of tobacco exchange. Tobacco connected the New World with Europe and the Caribbeans. Why, you may ask? When Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas, he saw Native Americans using tobacco for medical and recreation purposes. Europeans joined in on this practice and eventually brought it back with them when they returned home. Of course, boats were used to transfer the product, as well as a compass to direct the way of travel. Barrels known as hogsheads were used to keep tobacco when on the ships once prepared for shipping.
Thank you, Shay, for explaining the effects of exchange.
We will now return to Fifi explaining the effects of consumers after a short commercial break.
We'll be back, folks.
Ever dreamed of living with royalty?
Close your eyes and imagine it.
The lavish lifestyles.
The status.
All the food, jewels, clothing, cars, and everything else you could possibly ever want.
Does your image include tobacco?
Of course it doesn't. Be like King James I of England.
As he said,
Dangerous to the eyes, harmful to the nose, harmful to the brain, and dangerous to the lungs.
Live like loyalty. Don't smoke tobacco.
this message has been brought to you by the TAT, Teenagers Against Tobacco.
This message is brought to you by news anchor Megan Daly. As our job here at Old News is always to inform you, we decided we'd talk about the different types of tobacco. Tobacco in its cultivated form, ready to ship form, chewable form, tobacco wrapped up in a cigarette. Tobacco has multiple forms and uses, as you have seen so far throughout our newscast today. What an interesting commercial break that was, with a quote from King James I of England.
Indeed it was. Here's a quote from an 18th century poet. Yet crowds remain who still its worth proclaim, while some for pleasure smoke, and some for fame.
What an interesting quote that is. Definitely prevalent in the 1800s fame and now today. Felice, another interesting verse from the time, which it was like a sing-song thing, poem relevant in that day, was life is a smoke, if this be true. Tobacco will thy life renew. Then fear not death, nor killing care, whilst we have best Virginia here. Kind of ironic, because Virginia was where the first cultivation of tobacco started, way back then. But,
Very interesting. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Felice.
And now here is Fifi to explain the effects of consumers. Fifi?
The production of tobacco in the Americas, but the Europeans supplemented the idea of slavery. Tobacco was a major cash drug due to the addictive qualities from the nicotine.
And we're back.
This is Old News saying,
Have a good
evening, Kentwood.